I'm Bruce Apar, and this is Frank J. Rich, and you're watching Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog. Come on in. Welcome again to Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog. This is, in case you're new to us, and we hope there are a lot of new people watching us, on cable as well as YouTube. And please do check us out on YouTube. There's a lot of shows there that you can watch at your leisure on demand. You can search for Town Link on YouTube, or you can also search for NCN Local, and all of the past shows will come up. And what we do on this show, it's a community affairs show, community forum, and Frank and I like to talk to a lot of interesting guests about a variety of topics, but always the focus is, as we like to put it, what's right with the world. There's enough places that you can go to see other types of information, maybe that's not so pleasant, but we want to talk about what's right with the world, and our guests and our topics always reflect that. And speaking of guests, we want to welcome the mayor of the city of Peekskill.
Oh, thank you, Bruce.
Mary Foster, the Honorable Mary Foster, to be to be appropriate. And we were just talking before we went on the air about some of the challenges that I guess any mayor has and that you have. But it would also seem, Mayor Foster, that your discipline, your professional background in accounting serves you well, right? As you do have to deal with things,
right,
especially this time of year, like budgets and so can you just comment on how in 2013 the city of Peekskill is set up to manage its budget?
Well, yeah, we went through a very, I want to say probably painstaking was the right word. I mean, a very, very, very careful budget review in 2012 as we were preparing the 2013 budget, but also at the same time taking a hard look at where we were in 2012, what are those variables we cannot control, and what are we going to do about them? Because nobody has a crystal ball. We're looking 3-4 years down the road, what we think are happening with revenues and expenses and decisions we need to make today to make that path much sturdier for the city. And so we work through NICOM, the New York Council of Mayors. I'm the treasurer for the Westchester Municipal Officers Association, which just means I'm part of the officers of the executive committee. And a lot of what we do is we talk about and collaborate. What can Albany do differently,
right,
both in terms of allowing us more flexibility in how we operate so we can secure our futures better, mandates that they really need to seriously come to grips with, and how are we all individually projecting things that are happening in pensions and healthcare costs, and where do we think the real estate market is going? And we all read the newspapers and we see the real estate industry's projections, it's bottomed out, it's coming up. We're trying to figure out, well, if you're selling more houses but at a lower rate, does it mean we're never getting more mortgage tax revenues,
right,
or mortgage tax revenues finally going to rebound or not? So we're all gazing into the same mud and trying to figure
right,
out what our budgets are going to need to be. And at the same time, we all need to preserve a piece of our fund balance and our reserves. You need that for economic stability. If you're really going to grow your communities, you need a healthy reserve fund balance policy. You also need enough workers to deliver the services. Most do not want to exceed the formulas for the tax cap,
right,
so it's
a
lot of
tax cap, yeah.
Yes, it's a lot of moving parts,
Right.
and each community at different points in the last 5 years have had to do a cut into layoffs. Some have done
right,
them earlier. As a city, we really kept prolonging that. We were hoping that through attrition, as people retired through attrition and we didn't fill positions, Revenues and revenues would rebound a little. Use of reserves would help balance that all out. But it became very clear in the last 2 years, 2010 and 2011, with the requirements that the state has imposed on contributions to the pension system, that all bets were off.
Right.
And you can't get 5-year projections. So is it 3 years of really horrendous increases where we've now increased 100% in 3 years what our contributions are to the pension system? Is that going to level off, or are we still on that rate of incline? We're all faced with that. We had to make the tough decision in 2012 that we were going to have to do deeper cuts into our workforce. And we did it through incentives for retirement. We had a number of individuals, primarily in the white-collar workforce, that had the years into retirement, and they took personally a serious look at their personal situations, the incentive we would give, whether they could, financially swing it, and many of them did. And we're grateful for that, because many of them did that knowing they were saving somebody else's job by doing that.
Real public service.
Well, and it's hard, municipal governments, employees work there for a long time, so it's like a family, and those are really hard decisions for individuals to make, and hard decisions for elected leaders and city managers to make.
Right.
But unfortunately, you have to make those decisions if you're going to stay financially viable. So that's what we ended up having to do. And we're still, those numbers are still fluctuating a little bit. Some others have opted in just in the last 2 weeks for retirement, so it's still shifting. And as some retire, we can bring back. 1 or 2 have been laid off, so we're hoping that is behind us. But there has been a real outcry to the state comptroller's office about giving pension projections. We need that information. Without it, we are just always doing a knee-jerk reaction to the next surprise. And that's no way to run a city. It's very difficult for the workforce, for them, not to know is another huge round of cuts coming.
Right.
So you want to get that pain behind you and kind of get the team focused, working forward, have a sense of certainty.
And you were saying you get not only you, but all municipalities get the pension numbers at the end of the year when your budgets basically are done, right?
Right. Yeah, we have to adopt by December 1st. Right. Some communities have to adopt by the end of December. It really varies. Right. The pension system continues to give you estimates, and then you, quote, get the final bill. Sometimes there's big surprises between the two, sometimes not so big.
And so what are the odds that the controller of the state will begin giving projections?
Well, I think this is what's happening. There's another push coming from, you have a number of policy think tanks. One is the Empire State Ideas.
Yeah.
They're pushing for local municipalities to do 5-year forecasts. And that when you do your annual budget, present a 5-year financial plan. So I was at a forum the other night, and there was, the concept of not making that just a suggestion, but, quote, a mandate.
Right.
So there was a lot of pushback on that idea of a mandate, because the 2 biggest things that impact your budget right now, which you would have thought your pension contributions would be more important than anything in the world. But right now, our pension payments are more than 10% of our total expenditure budget.
Right.
So you can't project pension payments, and you can't project where you're going to be with tax certs and tax givebacks.
Right.
A lot of communities like Peekskill are finally catching up with this backlog of tax settlement requests that went back 7, 8 years.
Right.
So, and there were no forecasts. Nobody said, oh, by the way, here's how we're projecting the givebacks on taxes. And as the real estate market softened, the tax certs just kept coming in. And that's all because Westchester County, by and large, very few communities are at 100% valuation for your property assessments. So your property assessments are at values back in the 50s, something like that. So those are the two biggest variables. Yeah. And so we can do 5-year plans. One, if we're all at 100% of property assessments, and if we know what the state comptroller's office is going to be looking for contributions to the pension system.
Right.
So that is being pushed back very hard back to the state, as well as to the county, because this suggested mandate is not just for villages and cities, it's for counties and towns.
Right.
And so if counties have to be providing the same kind of information, they're a part of the same they suffer from the same problem school districts and we do, and that's not knowing really where you're going to be on your tax settlement liabilities.
Right.
So there's a push. There's a movement coming. I think the state comptroller is hearing it. I know they have the data. The issue is how comfortable they feel having that data be public and being used in, annual budget projections for local municipalities. But absent some data, when there's a void, a black hole, people fill it in with whatever they have.
Right.
We call that gossip, right?
Some people call it news. But
Right, that's right. From a financial side, it's just more wrong data.
Right.
So then, if I heard you correctly, I may not have, but you are suggesting that the tax assessments are not as high as they ought to be, or property assessments are not as high as they ought to be, and
It's not that they're not as high as they ought to be. You get an equalization rate from the state. What town are you in?
We're in Yorktown.
You're in
Yeah,
Yorktown,
right.
so you haven't done a reval in
No.
generations either.
People keep asking for one, but it hasn't been done.
Right, because and there is a movement throughout all of Westchester County, because school districts transcend municipal boundaries.
Right.
If one municipality
Right.
brings their property assessments up to true value, right now we do it through a formula. So there's a formula that would say if your property is assessed at $10,000, New York State every year gives us a number and says, plug that number in and it'll tell you that property is really worth X.
Right.
That formula is an average.
Right.
And so, like any other average, taxpayer gets that and says, oh, well, I don't really think my property is worth that based on a formula. So I think my house is actually worth less. So that means this $10,000 assessment of 50 years ago must be too high. And so, because if I take that $10,000 and divide it by 3% or whatever number New York State gives each municipality, which is an average, like with every averages, you have people who are higher and people who are lower. Those who say, oh, wow, my house is assessed to too low, but I'm not going to say
Anything,
I want
right.
to pay more in taxes. It's only those who think that old assessment based on a formula is too high is going to come back in and ask for money back.
Right.
but isn't
right.
isn't the reconciliation for tax purposes done through mill rates and changes in them?
When your assessment values change, yes. So if your total assessment rolls were $60 million and you're collecting $10 million in tax levy dollars, if that $60 million dropped to 50 and you still have to collect $10 million, the tax rate changes, but the city isn't, or the community isn't going to collect any more dollars. They're just going to get, instead of 10 over 60, you're going to get 10 over 50. So your rate will go from, I don't know, 1/6 is whatever the percentage is. Don't make me do math right now.
Right.
But 1/5 is 20%. Okay, so so yes,
16.
but it's not when it's even-handed. It's when some people say, well, I want a refund. So it's not just that I think I'm paying too much and I need you to adjust my value going forward, but I think I've paid too much for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And so I want a refund on back taxes. And if you have a lot of commercial properties, years ago they had started filing for tax assessment reductions, and those just kind of meandered their way through a process. And about 5 years ago, the courts started to say, we want that process expedited. We want these things moving. And so the year I became mayor, I'm being told that, all these tax cert claims are now going to be expedited through the courts. And I'm like, fine, well, how many are there? Hundreds.
Right, yeah, yes, right.
Oh, okay. And by the way, when they first filed, they were looking for 3 years, and that was several years ago. And so they're just carrying their claims forward.
Right.
And so every community was faced with that. So all reval does is tell every property owner, as of a certain point in time, what your property is truly worth, not based on a formula of old assessments divided by a state rate, but just saying your house is really worth $600,000.
Based on what?
based on detailed appraisals and assessments. And so it is a long process in going through that. And any assessor's office who's faced with doing a reval knows that they need to bring on a lot of other professionals, during that period.
So the assumption is that when houses are sold or commercial properties and the like, that they map the estimates that were made of appraisals.
That they map them?
That they map them because if they don't, then one or the other is at odds. So, I mean, I always think of when people say, "Gee, that house has got to be worth," and my answer is it's worth as much as anyone is willing to pay for it.
Yeah,
well,
right.
I agree. And see, and that's what all the state does is they look at sales of different types of property in your community on an annual basis, and they determine whether the value of the sales price to your old historical assessments is going up or down. And they give you a number and they plug it in. But when a house sells and somebody pays more for the house, it doesn't increase on the property assessment rolls. The only changes to the property assessment rolls is new construction or additions to existing buildings. But just because the same house
was turned over,
turned over 10 times in 2 generations, it hasn't changed its basic assessment.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because, I mean, I think people want to know about those things. It's very close to them, and so I doubt if you could walk up the street and talk to 10 people and have one of them disagree with the idea that they're paying too much taxes on real estate.
Well, that's right. And very little of it has to do with the value of the property. It has to do with the sense of I pay a lot in taxes. And we all know that 60 to 65%, depending on where you live, of your tax bill is going to the school districts.
Taxes, yes.
But the school districts don't do the assessments on the properties. They just get the information from the municipality, figure out what they need to collect, and that's their rate.
And that this area is a high tax area.
Yeah, extremely. Our company, as you know, Chase Media Group, through the Penny Saver, and I want to remind everybody we are brought to you by the Penny Saver, and a host of other goods and services that we offer. We're very vested in local businesses. We deal with thousands of local businesses, and that ties into what you're saying about the need for revenue. And that one of the primary sources of that is from commercial taxes and commercial districts and economic development. And let's start off with the Paramount Theater, which the city of Peekskill owns, right?
Yes, we own the building.
The city of Peekskill owns the Paramount Theater, which is temporarily closed. And it's going through a major transition, right? It's fair to say.
Yes.
So I know you have 3, I believe it is, Mayor, 3 bids from theater operators, and you're looking at those and we'll choose one of them, is that?
We have 3 proposals. They're all very interesting, and will we choose one of them? I don't know. Maybe we want one from A, one from B, and half from C. I don't know. But we're in the middle of interviewing the individual proposers to really understand their vision, what they see as the strengths of the Paramount, the strength of the area, the broad area, not just Peekskill, but the broader area. What type of culture and entertainment do they think works into a long-term vision for the Paramount Center? We still think of it as the Paramount Center for the Arts. So what's the vision long term, and how does that become financially viable? As we had talked about earlier, so many industries are really going through disruptive change since the recession has hit. And the challenge is really building resilient organizations. And even when you're thinking about cultural institutions, you do need a sense of resiliency. So you do need a team who has a vision. What are the big game changers that may be out there impacting not just cultural institutions, but also how the next generations take in music?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? How do they appreciate music? What you and I would like to do is different than what my 33-year-old son would like to do, is different than what my 22-year-old daughter would like to do, my 40-year-old nieces and nephews. And so how do you build that resiliency into a cultural institution? And I think the day is long done where an organization can just survive based on contributed income, so that you get, you cover, 80% of your costs through the box office, and the rest all has to be contributed income. in this environment, that is very, very hard to sustain. It's also very difficult to build long-term plans around that way.
Right.
And so it's thinking about how else do you generate revenues from a performing arts center? How do you keep it open for the community, to bring community theater there, but also balance the need for marquee events? As an economic engine, it is to draw people into the city of Peekskill. As a cultural institution, it is to provide culture. Those should not be mutually exclusive goals, but they have to be balanced goals because they all bring a different level of revenue stream. You know, so what's the vision of what people are proposing? How much money do they have backing them up? What is going to make that organization resilient? Because we certainly don't want to be talking about this 2 years from now. And the field of entertainment and cultural institutions are changing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so that's everything going through our minds. In
Right.
addition to what does our community want, what works for the broader area,
Right.
and we have 3 proposers with some very interesting ideas.
But the city's going through a budget shortfall right in the first quarter, isn't that correct? Or
Well, we're not
Right.
going through a budget shortfall. We have
But-
cash flow because you don't
Right.
collect your taxes until, so you have your cash flow needs are very different in the first quarter because you have a lot of it. You have your normal
Right.
expenses.
That's fairly typical.
It's very
Right,
typical,
right.
but your cash doesn't start to come in until April or May.
Okay, so the larger question, as far as the Paramount's concerned, that a lot of people, as you well know, are posing, is should a municipal government in general, and the city of Peekskill in particular, own a venue
The
like that
building?
at this stage?
I don't know.
I mean, what's
We're
your,
not
what's your
willing to
personal
sell it.
feeling?
I mean, we're not
so-
willing to
So you do plan to hold on to it?
Well, we're not planning to sell it, no.
Right, right,
You know, you can look at it and say, should the city own the building?
right.
Well, if you view it as only a building, you can talk about it as a pure real estate transaction. If you look at it as a cultural asset, should the city get rid of a cultural asset? So we look at the Paramount as a cultural asset. We're not really willing to sacrifice that at this point in time, but rather we're looking for somebody who can help restore the cultural asset and bring it to its full potential. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be a commercial aspect to it. There has to be a commercial aspect to it for it to be resilient. But if you looked at it as just a building, then you have a different perspective. There would be some who would just say that, government should, everybody has a different point of view of what the role of government is.
Right.
And I think that debate goes on at every level of government. And so I know there are some who would just say, well, are you willing to sell it?
So whoever does come in, it'll be an operating contract.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's
It's
really
a
what it
lease.
is. Yeah,
It's a
at
lease, and
right,
it's 2
right.
contracts. We own the building, so you're a tenant, so you have a lease. So you have obligations as a tenant, but then you'll also have obligations as the operator of the performance space.
But they won't pay taxes.
They can't. We own the
But that's
building.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So there's no tax.
They could pay rent.
Right, but there's no taxes.
Right now we
because
get no rent. Right now it
city
costs the
pays
city
no
money.
taxes.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it doesn't come on the tax rolls unless you sell it.
Right, that's what I mean. yeah.
Well, I applaud the extraordinary way in which you characterize that entire model for consideration. Well done. People ought to hear that. The decision for a cultural entity, a legacy such as the Paramount Theater, is made more complicated by how important it would be by its absence and how conspicuous that absence would be if it were not here. My maternal grandparents settled in Peekskill as immigrants. I don't really have much understanding of what happened then, but there are still some of those people around, so to speak. But I think that's the richness in that discussion is the thing that helps people understand more fully how decisions are made and why they're made, without actually coming to a decision so easily as people would like to. So I think that's terrific. I mean, the job of someone in your position in the political realm is challenging at best. There are those who would political groupies laud everything that you do, every decision that you make. And then there are the others who consider all politicians as fatuous and incompetent. And you balance that. You must have some internal understanding of how to behave under those circumstances. I'm not sure I do, but you must.
I was on a conference call last night with Governor Cuomo and a number of other mayors from around the state, and it was very interesting because the governor made, a very accurate statement, and we all feel it, and that is the opposition or the naysayers are always screaming and yelling. Those who support what you're doing are always silent.
Yes, right. Yeah, well, it's true. Yeah.
And so part of it is understanding that sometimes the loud verbal input, or sometimes the quote loud written input on the blogs is
Right.
it is coming from a particular perspective, but that is not the only perspective that is out there.
Right.
And for any elected official, you are balancing a lot of broad interests. And for I would say for generations, the city has been proud of its cultural heritage. The Peekskill Museum, which is another one of these little hidden gems, one could say, you could sell that building. The richness of the history of what the Peekskill Museum has, and the dedication of the board members to now start bringing monthly programs to the public to kind of bring the history forth is very important. But that kind of embracing of our past is what also spurs a group like the Lincoln Society to still commemorate annually the historic visit, but to also then spur the creation of the Lincoln Museum down at the riverfront. And one could say, well, that building could be torn down and condos could be put up there. But if you really want to embrace your history and create it into cultural assets, those are choices you make. And so you still need to have commercial development because you need to be able to support that. But every city needs commercial development.
Right. Well, and of course there is what you're saying, I think, is that there is equity in history.
Yes.
And you have to extract value from it.
Absolutely.
And quickly, because we've gotten the high sign from our director, can you just run down quickly, Mayor Foster, some new businesses that you're anticipating?
Right. Well, we did a ribbon cutting last night. The Peekskill Brewery, has officially opened, their new expansion into their new location, which is wonderful, right down along the waterfront. One of our other existing owners of the Quiet Man Pub is opening another eatery down right at the riverfront. It'll be called the Yellow Brick Road Cafe.
Because L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz, lived here, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
One of our existing owners is a family that's been in the city for a long time. Savamore is building a new building, is buying land, building a new building in the city, will be expanding his business and then renting his existing building. Main Street Commons is coming, the Holiday Inn Express is being built as we speak. That's sort of, I think it's on its third floor right now. So we'll be having, we'll be having a wonderful ribbon cutting for them later this year.
And that's done by John Walsh Boulevard.
That's right down on John Walsh Boulevard, absolutely. The Page Printing Building, which is down along the waterfront, has a new business that's coming in. It's a gallery showcase workshop for antique lights and scientific investments.
And I know, speaking of restaurants that are extending their franchise, the Birdsall House recently opened another
Gleason's, absolutely.
Location as well. So that's really good news. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up. I mean, there's a lot more, of course, we could be talking about, and we'll have you back on the show for that.
Sure, we'll talk about winter parking when we do
that.
that.
Exactly. That's right. It will probably be the spring, but anyhow, we want to thank Mayor Mary Foster of the City of Peekskill for being with us today, and thank you for watching. And on behalf of my co-host Frank J. Rich and myself, thanks for watching Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog. And remember, when Bruce the Blog listens, people talk. Bye.